Now, hello everybody, and welcome to the Veterans Action Council Roundtable number 31. Tonight we have an extra special guest for us, Alice O'Leary Randall, who is a cannabis pioneer, and basically we consider her a godmother to our movement because of the history and what she has done and what she has helped accomplish, has given a lot of weight to all of our voices. And we would not be where we are as a movement if it hadn't been for Alice. So Alice, thank you for joining us tonight. Please introduce yourself as you wish to people to see. People, a lot in our community have only heard your name and heard of things that you have done, so they're not aware of your full experience. So please introduce yourself accordingly.
Wow. Okay. Where to begin? So I think everyone knows that my late husband was Robert Randall, who was the first federal cannabis patient. And that was back in 1976. It's quite a while ago. Robert's training was in speech. He actually had a master's degree in rhetoric, which really prepared him for what life threw his way. My training in college was in theater, technical theater to be precise, designing lights, installing sets, being a stage manager, that kind of stuff. And that really prepared me for, it's ironic when I think back on it, it really prepared me a lot for what Bob and I went through, because it gave me the confidence to be able to move forward. And I knew from theater that things were always going to go wrong. So you just adapt and you move on to the next stage. And that helped a lot. But I also became the breadwinner in our family. Robert was busy doing medical marijuana, and so I ended up being the salary person. And so I ended up working at the, is everyone sitting down? Okay, good. I ended up working at the Society for Scholarly Publishing, which is such a mouthful. I always said that if I wanted to stop conversation in any group that I was with, that's all I had to do is say, well, yes, during my years as administrator of the Society for Scholarly Publishing. Well, people just don't have anything to come back with for that. So, but it was really fascinating. And as dry and as dull as it sounds, it taught me so much about publishing. And I remember people talking about, I started working for them in 81. And even at that point, they were talking, major publishers of scholarly works, we're talking about HTML language and the coming electronic publishing revolution. And honestly, it was really exciting stuff. And it gave me the background to be able to publish the first books that Bob and I did, which was really a republishing, a reprinting of the 1988 hearings before the DEA administrative law judge. So we published like five volumes from those hearings, because the hearings themselves, you stack all the paper together from those hearings before Judge Young. And they'd come up about that high. It was just an immense amount of paperwork between all the depositions and the briefs and whatnot. And so that was our first foray into publishing. And then let's see, in the 1990s, fortunately we had a benefactor. I was able to leave my job at the Scholarly Publishing Group and work full-time on medical cannabis. That was in the 90s. And then Bob became ill. We returned to Florida. He passed away in 2001. And I was, no offense, folks, but I was really over marijuana at that point. we'd already been at it for 25 years. We'd accomplished a great deal, but I couldn't really see my way at that point to where I would go in the movement without Bob. And I think that's pretty natural. And so, and so my sister one day said, well, if you could do anything in the world, Alice, what would you do? And I said, I'd work with hospice. Not what you might expect most people to say, but I still am intrigued by the concept of hospice, the importance of hospice. And so I took about a year and a half. I got a license, a nursing license, and eventually spent 6 years working for hospice. I also worked for a year in the ER, and I worked for a year with an oncology practice. Just got a whole bunch of wonderful experience on a different side of the issue, if you will. I mean, I was really right in there with the patients, and I was just happy to leave marijuana behind for a while. And then I retired. Well, I was laid off. Get this, folks, the day before my 65th birthday, I was laid off. I mean, how cold is that? Yeah. I mean, how cold is that? I'm asking you.
Very.
And I could not face doing the resume thing and everything, so I retired. And I kind of found my way back into the movement because honestly, between 2001 and 2012, the whole world had changed in terms of medical cannabis. And so there was a lot of new stuff to learn, a lot of new people to meet. And I was fortunate to work with the folks at Mary's Medicinals, and they allowed me to be their traveling ambassador to go to all of these conferences. And oh, the number of conferences is just, I mean, I could spend an hour talking about the current patch of cannabis conferences because they're so exciting. You know, when Bob and I started out, there was one conference. It was normal, you know. Once a year, you got to go to the normal conference, you know. And now, my God, well, before the pandemic, every other week, or every week, it seemed, there was some cannabis conference somewhere. And so I have to say that break of 10 years or so between Bob's death and coming back into it was really beneficial to me. I learned a lot. I got to disconnect from medical marijuana for a while, and it was fine. And so that's it. I was working with Mary's right up until the pandemic hit. You know, you really don't need a traveling ambassador when there's no traveling. That's what I've learned. And so they terminated my contract. And so I've just been sitting here at home trying to put together the legacy and trying to organize it and make sure that papers, we do have an archive that is situated with the Wisconsin Historical Society. All of Bob's papers and most of my papers are up there at this point. That may seem odd. Why Wisconsin? And primarily it's because they have an excellent archival section on the what's the word I'm looking for here? On the development of pharmaceutical products during the 19th century and through the 20th century. And so it just seemed like a good place to put our archives. So I've been shipping a lot of stuff up to Wisconsin and organizing things. And I've recently, this was a book that Bob and I published in 1998. Does it come out properly? It's reversed on my screen, but it's okay on yours, right?
Yeah, we can see it loud and clear. Perfect.
Okay. So what I've done is I've taken this book and I'm repurposing it. It occurred to me that the first 25 years of the medical cannabis movement were analog. There was no digital. And I didn't really think about it until I went looking for a clean copy of the decision in U.S. v. Randall. Robert's first case back in 1976. And it took me forever to find a copy. I never did find a clean copy. The one I found was terribly, it was just all smudgy from too many trips through the ethers. And so I've taken this book and I'm splitting it into 3 parts, and I'm attaching monographs to it that have clippings from that time. So that my hope is that the clippings and the links to the decisions, and as we get into the later years, links to the videos and whatnot, I'm hoping that will just flesh out the entire story that's in this book. So that's what I'm working on at this point. I found a wonderful resource called newspapers.com. For those of you who are into trying to find something from the past, this website, I love this place. It's just great. I found it several years ago, and it was just kind of getting going, and then ancestry.com took it over. And now you can find clippings from almost any era. I mean, it's so exciting. So I found a lot of clippings from the late 70s and then into the 80s. And I've put them together into monographs, which are, I've attached to the first half of this book, first part of this book, which is available at my website, which is www.aliceo'learyrandall.com. And I'll be doing a second part this year, and probably the third part will come out, the Lord willing, in early 23. So that's the nutshell, kids.
Wow. Well, needless to say, it is key that we find somebody to actually digitize the reality that we have experienced, because it was so analog. I myself remember when I was starting off as an activist, we would do events, and then a few weeks to months later, we would get a clipping sent to us in the mail from an individual over something that we finally appeared in the local, newspaper, et cetera. So I think that it's a key contribution, and thank you for reigniting the history and also becoming the documentarian of our history, because it's key. Especially what you and Bob did. It is such a testament to what has led to the realities that we have. So I'm going to turn over, we're going to ask some questions, if you don't mind. And I'm going to start off with Council Member George Armstrong.
Okay. First off, I'd just like to thank you for being with us. It really is a huge honor for all of us to have you with us, Alice.
Thank you.
I would like to know why did you form the Alliance for Cannabis Therapeutics, and if you could tell everybody a little bit about that, and what the need for it was.
Sure. The Alliance for Cannabis Therapeutics was founded in 1980, 81, kind of on the cusp there. The reason when we first started our quest, the only available resource to us was NORML. And honestly, I can't thank Keith and Mark Heitlinger, Larry Schott, Peter Myers, all these wonderful people from NORML, and I can't thank them enough, because they were such a big help to us in the early years. And after the publicity on Bob's case hit the news, such as it was, 3 major channels, but a lot of newspapers and a lot of radio talk shows. That's what we had in the 70s. We didn't have the 24/7 newscasts that we have today. CNN wasn't founded until 81, I think. So we made a lot of publicity. We got a lot of news, and we got a lot of letters as a result. A lot of requests for, hey, I want what you have. I got glaucoma. Where do I sign up? That kind of stuff. And it got to the point where Bob and I simply could not afford to to answer those queries. This was still the day of you write a letter, you put it in an envelope, you put a stamp on it, you take it to the corner, kind of thing. And long distance calls, forget it. I mean, everything was by the minute, and so, patients would call and we say, can we call you back after 11 o'clock at night? I mean, it was just kind of ludicrous, but that's when the rates were cheaper. But then Normal offered, actually they offered Bob a position. And Bob did not want to be officially affiliated with Normal. But he suggested that, maybe they could hire Alice. And so they did. And I established something called the Medical Reclassification Project. And that was in 77, I believe. And that was really great because we had Normal's resources of telephones and postage and copying, 3 big things for us. But as time moved on, it became apparent that being tied to Normal, there had to be something other than Normal. Normal was the only game in town when it came to reform. And too many patients were nervous about coming to Normal because, it was about drug legalization and, maybe they're listening on my telephone in Wichita, Kansas to see if I'm talking to Normal. I don't, there was a lot of paranoia in those times. And so we recognized that. In fact, not long after Bob got his first supplies of marijuana, which was in November of 1976, there was an editorial, I think it was it might have been Seattle or Spokane, Washington. And they talked about how Robert's case was simply a conjured up situation that was going to be a red herring for legalization. I mean, it was that quick. It was within a few months of his getting access that the negativity came forward. And so there I am working for Normal, but we still have a lot of people who just won't contact us. And it became apparent to us that we needed to separate the two. We knew they would still say, well, medical marijuana is just all a red herring. We knew that, but nevertheless, we felt it was important that there be a dedicated organization, a dedicated nonprofit to the medical use. And so that's primarily why we formed it. The other reason is, can we share the screen now, Etienne? Is that going to work?
Go ahead.
This should be fun, kids. Where are you? Let's see. Bear with me.
It's all good. We understand. Zoom has its own realities.
All right, let's see if this will work. Hello?
Yep, we can see. We can see at top of a screen, V.A.C. meeting.
Okay, good. I can't see it, so that's fine. But that's all right. This was another reason that we decided to split from Normal. You might think this is a current map in the 2000s, but actually this is from 1981. In 1981, there were 30 some states that had enacted the New Mexico style law, which was a law that legalized marijuana, medical marijuana for use in New Mexico through a state research program that would get marijuana from the federal government. They would bring it into New Mexico. Cancer and glaucoma patients would be allowed to access it. Their doctors would report on their conditions and their situations, and all of that would go back to Washington, D.C. And in theory, this would provide the research that we needed to prove to the feds that it worked. And this New Mexico bill passed in 1978, February 1978. In that same year, 3 more states followed suit: Louisiana, Florida, and Illinois. But then in 79, I think there were 11 states that enacted laws. And then in 80, there were a few more. And so by the time Ronald Reagan came into Washington and was inaugurated, there were 34 states that had medical use laws, but the feds were blocking access to their supply. They didn't have enough supplies. They didn't have enough supplies to give to 34 states. But you have to admit, that's a lot of power right there. I mean, we had a pretty powerful platform that we were standing on. And so one of the other reasons that we formed ACT was because we had a congressman, Stuart McKinney of Connecticut, who agreed to, if we could give him a law, if we could draft the whole thing, he would introduce a medical marijuana law to the Congress. And that's what he did. It was in September of 1981. And I hope you can see Mr. McKinney for himself, and also Mr. Gingrich. We all know who Newt Gingrich is out there, yeah? Okay.
Sadly, yes.
Newt Gingrich, yeah. Newt Gingrich was an original sponsor of the first federal marijuana medical marijuana legislation. Mr. Fish and Mrs. Fenwick, some people still know who Millicent Fenwick was. Excuse me. But this was in September of 1981. And I believe that was, yes, 97th Congress first session. 97th Congress second session. Look at these, look at the number of co-sponsors we had. And they were all reacting to laws that had been passed in their state, because their states weren't getting the marijuana that the federal government said they would give them. And so we had a tremendous number of sponsors. Here you can see a list of them here. And you'll notice there's a lot of R's. There's a lot of Republicans in this mix. And really, for a true conservative, and I'm talking true conservative, I'm not talking a Newt Gingrich conservative, I'm not talking about the neoconservatives, but for a true conservative, medical marijuana makes perfect sense. We're talking about individual rights. It's almost, we're talking about true conservatives that are borderline libertarian, okay? But it's a right. It's a human right to have the medicine that you need. And so by forming ACT, we were able to create a machine, if you will. Bob called it the information machine. And he just poured out information into the Congress. This is an example of one of the press releases that he wrote. Let's see, this is November 16th. That would be 2 or 3 months after the first bill was introduced. And he was constantly pushing out into the atmosphere, if you will, information about HR 4498, factual information about marijuana as medicine. It was his information war, if you will, and that's how he spent his day, lobbying for HR 4498, and that was a really big reason that we formed ACT. We had pro bono assistance from Steptoe and Johnson, which is still one of the largest law firms in Washington, DC. And it just seemed like the right time. And we had high hopes, pardon the pun. So long-winded answer, but that's it, George.
I appreciate that. Going next to, let's see, question number 2 will go to Councilmember Amy King.
Oh, you're muted, Amy.
Amy, you're muted.
Oh, okay. Hi, Alice. Thanks for joining us. I'm like So
Sure.
sad that I only get one question. Thank you for experiencing what it's like to work with hospice. I really appreciated hearing that. One of my favorite people, organizations at the UN is the hospice organization, because they're the ones really fighting drug control policies worldwide. When you look at the amount of consumption of opiates and pain relief that we can get in the US, that maybe the top 5% can get in the rest of the world, and the majority don't get until they reach hospice. So thank you for that. I'm going to sneak one small question in first. I wanted to ask, are you yourself also a cannabis patient? Do you, or have you, maybe if you weren't, are you now in your more senior years? I would like you to expand on that. And then I'd like to ask you, my main question is, why did you, Robert, do the Palm Act? Why did you create the Palm Act?
Yeah. First of all, yes, I am a cannabis patient. I used it when I was younger for fun. I cannot tell a lie. But also I had migraines when I'm in my 30s and into my 40s. And it was I used it medically for my migraines. It was very helpful. And then when I became a nurse, I really kind of stepped away from cannabis, because you're constantly, you're subject to P tests, urinalysis tests. So I was away from it for a while. And then I came back into it for fun. I've used it for back pain. But then last summer, I had an onset of an autoimmune disease called polymyalgia rheumatica, which is a disease, an autoimmune disease, which causes inflammation of your joints and a really systemic kind of pain that that was a real surprise. I really thought I had COVID. It came on so suddenly. You always think of autoimmune diseases as kind of being with you and just kind of slowly presenting themselves. But this came on so suddenly, I thought I must have COVID. But the treatment for it is steroids. And I was doing sort of okay, and then I wasn't doing very well with them. And I finally decided I should put my money where my mouth was and really dedicate myself to a cannabinoid regimen. And so I'm taking about between 100 and 130 milligrams a day of CBD, and about anywhere from 5 to 15 milligrams of THC a day. And I'm doing very well with my polymyalgia rheumatica. The inflammation has come down, it's staying down. We had a curious little blip back December, and I realized I kind of, by switching my CBD provider, I kind of knocked THC out of the equation, and boy, I really needed that THC. I found that out pretty quickly. So yes, I am. I'm very grateful to have a rheumatologist here in Florida who is interested in this and does not poo-poo it in any way. So yes, I am a cannabinoid patient. So that's that. And what made us create PALM? Okay, PALM paralyzed Americans for legal medical marijuana. So it was really PAL, 2 M's, PALM. And PALM was, PALM came into creation around the same time as MARS, which was the Marijuana AIDS Research Service. AIDS and para or quadriplegia gave Bob and I an interesting opportunity. These two conditions have a very set, not a set regimen, but a set list, if you will, of symptomology. If you look at the 1980s, when several compassionate IND patients like Irv Rosenfeld, L.V. Musica, George McMahon, when all of those folks acquired their legal access to marijuana in the 1980s, these were for really different disease categories. What is it that Irv has? Pseudo hyperthyroidism. That's Irv Rosenfeld's disease. George McMahon had Nails patella syndrome. LV, of course, has glaucoma, but my point is they were kind of unusual diseases and took a long time to write the IND process for them. With AIDS, particularly with AIDS and with para and quadriplegics, we had a situation where we could prepare the entire IND because we knew how to do that part. And then we put in a questionnaire that the doctor and the patient could sit down with and check off. Are you having this kind of symptomology? Would marijuana help that? Yes. Are you having this kind of symptomology? And we created a situation in which a doctor and a patient could complete an IND application in about 20 minutes to half an hour, as opposed to 8 to 10 hours. And so those two disease categories, and being able to create those checklist INDs, if you will. We had this benefactor, Rich Dennis, from Chicago, and he gave us the money to start these two kind of side projects to the Alliance for Cannabis Therapeutics. MARS, Marijuana AIDS Research Service, was launched in February of '91, I believe, and PALM was launched shortly thereafter, sometime in the spring of that same year. Now, the response with AIDS was overwhelming. It was just stunning. I mean, we had printed off about 1,000 of those INDs. They flew out the door before we even knew what happened. And we had a lot of AIDS groups calling up and saying, gee, is it okay if we make Xerox copies of these? Sure. You know? And it really overran FDA in terms of IND applications. PALM, for reasons that we never really understood, PALM never really got off the ground the way we thought it would. We had, I think, 2 people in PALM that did receive FDA approval, but they never got supplies. They got caught in that awful time where the Bush administration was shutting the compassionate IND program down. With MARS, there were only maybe a half dozen to maybe a dozen that got approved, but they never got supplies. So both of those projects, and we also had another one called MOMS, Mothers of Medical Marijuana Smokers. And our dear friend May Nutt, can I see a show of hands of people who know who May Nutt is? Oh, thank you. Okay. All right, May Nutt, extraordinary woman from Michigan, who lost 2 sons to cancer, 2 sons. And the second son that she lost, Keith, he kind of, what's the word? He kind of got things going in Michigan to get the Controlled Substances Therapeutic Research Act passed in Michigan. And ironically, he died on the day that the legislation was signed into law. And May went on to become an activist in her own right. I mean, no one would have blamed her if she had just gone away and tried to put it behind. But no, she was pissed. She was so mad that her son had been denied this. And of course, she heard from a lot of other people who were in the same boat, and she just became a marvelous advocate for us. And so we decided that she needed something to take with her when she went on these speeches and whatnot. So I don't have one handy. No. So we created a mom's button that she could wear and hand out to people. So we really had kind of 3 side projects to the Alliance. So the Alliance really served us as a good platform for a number of different approaches to the whole angle. Does that answer your question, Amy? Both of them?
Yes, ma'am, absolutely. Again, thank you for coming back to us. Thank you for the pioneering you did,
Sure.
you know, for with your husband, for being the breadwinner, for, you know, going out and doing and telling the story again. And thank you, like Etienne, for have already said, but for recreating and making available this history. I'm a stickler. You know, we have all these amazing know-it-all influencers now who've all been in this fight for about 2 years. Really quickly, I was crafting a bill hired by the Libertarian Party for a particular state, and I said, talking to this person who hired me, "Do you know who Peter McWilliams is?" And he said, "No." I said, "Well, I can't believe you're coming to me as the Libertarian Party, asking me to craft a bill for you for medical cannabis, and you don't know who Peter McWilliams is. Let me give you a couple videos, bring you up to speed so that you no longer embarrass me." It's a shame that we've forgotten so many that are unknown to those who call themselves influencers, those who came before us. So thank you for being here and doing what you do.
Well, thank you, Amy, because you totally hit the nail on the head here. For some reason, a few months back, I had reason to go back into looking up Peter McWilliams and his case, and what was his friend's name? I've forgotten now.
Todd.
Yes, thank you so much. Todd
McCormick.
Yeah, Todd McCormick, and I read through that whole thing again, and the cruelty in that case was unbelievable, and it wasn't just Peter. I mean, the federal government in that time, not that they're, I hope they're different now. I don't know, but in the first 25 years of medical marijuana, they were so cruel to people, promising them things, denying them things. And Peter McWilliams' case is certainly one of the worst in that regard. So yeah, thank you for bringing up his name. And you know, if we don't know where we've come from, how the hell are we going to know where we're going? You know, it's a lot more than making a buck. So
I think unfortunately right now, that is where we are. All these influencers, all of these investors, all of these former prohibitionists that sit at the heads of companies that just aren't the grassroots, you know, and so again, I try and point that out. So you being present, Peter can't be here. So many before us that you've known aren't here with us now to speak, and so thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
That's a great trip down history for a lot of people who don't understand the true history and how it was on the backs of patients by patients because there was no other way or route, which kind of leads to our next question, because you fought a long slog and legal battle, you and Bob both. Of course, Bob did. You were by his side through it all. So next question comes from Council Member Pearson Kennedy Crosby.
Hi, Alice. I very much appreciate your willingness to give your time here. It's the only thing we can't purchase back, and it is incredibly appreciated. But so I sit here in a legal cannabis cafe in the state of Alaska. Besides where I'm sitting right now, I guess this would be proof, but when did you know you won the battle for medical cannabis and that you and Bob won the case for access for medical cannabis for all?
Good question. I don't think we knew until he actually came home with some marijuana. it was, you know, we went at this with two, on two tracks, if you will. We had to battle the criminal charges against both of us. Actually, the criminal charges against me got thrown out during the proceedings, because the police couldn't prove I lived there, which, well, we won't go there. You know, they're police. So there was that. There was the criminal aspect, but then the lawyers also filed a petition with the federal government seeking permission for Bob to use the federal government's supplies of marijuana. And we had we were in the dark here. We had no idea whether, we didn't know what we were doing. We were just going with what our instinct said. And Bob,
Best way to do it. I'm sorry to cut you off, but that is the best way to do it.
It is. You know, Bob went to UCLA in December of 1975. He was there for 10 days, and he was tested by the only ophthalmologist in the country at that point who had permission to use marijuana on glaucoma patients. And this ophthalmologist, I mean, he's probably still with us, Robert Hepler. He was excellent. He tried everything on Bob, and determined that he determined that Bob needed to use the conventional medications, conventional glaucoma medications, but without marijuana. Marijuana seems, in Bob's case, seemed to be the one thing that it worked with the conventional medications and brought his eye pressures down into the safe range. And so Bob returned from UCLA in December 1975 with this treasure trove of clinical data from the only licensed ophthalmologist in the country to test him with marijuana. Okay. The government never saw it coming. I mean, I still take joy from this. I mean, Bob was such a lone wolf. He was flying so under the radar. And Harry Onslinger, you know, bless him wherever he is, he really went out of his way to set up this situation where nobody would be able to get legal access to marijuana. But he anticipated big pushes from associations or organized crime, or, you know, whatever was in his brain. Nobody in the federal government ever anticipated one individual knocking at their door and saying, "Hi, I'm 28 years old, and if I don't get legal access to marijuana, I'm going to go blind." And the federal bureaucrats did not know how to deal with it. And their first reaction was compassion. And they wanted to help. And so our lawyers started working with them. And, you know, as they worked along, suddenly all the help started to fall away and doors started to shut, and people who were once warm and friendly and helpful, they kind of, you know, they became a little cold. And, you know, it was quite a remarkable shift. And then once our lawyers prepared a petition saying, "We want Mr. Randall to have legal access to federal supplies of marijuana," the doors really shut, because the game plan was on the table, right? And I don't think the federal government ever saw it coming.
Absolutely. You can't control anything unless you know the strings that can control them.
Right, exactly. So we have these two tracks going. We have the criminal track and the legal, the civil petition track. The legal track, we went to trial in July of 1976. We sort of thought we'd have a decision in a few weeks, and it was awful. The judge in the case was quite a brilliant man. He was former dean of the Howard University Law School. He was a diabetic, and just before he was to release the decision, he fell down a flight of stairs and broke his neck, and became, ironically, quadriplegic for a while. But through hard work, he managed to get his mobility back and he went back to work. But that delayed the decision by months. So that was one thing. And then
Was
on
this
the
Francis Young? Out of curiosity, was this Francis Young?
no, this was James Washington.
Okay.
Yeah, James Washington was the judge in the case of V.A.C. Randall. And so so we've got the criminal case. You know, we've been to trial. We're waiting for his decision. He falls down the stairs. It's like, then on the civil side, we have these bureaucrats. We're trying. First of all, they say, well, you have to have a researcher because we can't just give it to Bob. You have to have a doctor, and he has to be a researcher, and he has to fill out all this paperwork, and he has to get a 750-pound safe and put it in his office for the supplies. And Bob will have to go to Howard University every day to smoke his marijuana for glaucoma. I mean, they started throwing up all of these ridiculous things. And Bob had convinced his primary doctor to kind of go along with it. But then when they started throwing all this stuff at him, my God, you know, he said, no, I can't do this, Bob. So we thought the whole thing was in the toilet around first part of September, 1976. And Bob was very, very despondent about it. This book I held up earlier, this is really written in his words primarily. So he writes quite movingly about feeling that he's lost it, you know, it's gone. It was so close. He writes at one point about so close, so close. And you know, he's sitting in our apartment and quite despondent, and the phone rings, and it's this woman from NIDA that he's been working with, and she has actually found a researcher at Howard University in Washington, D.C., who's willing to take on all of this paperwork, distributing marijuana, doing the studies, et cetera, et cetera. So that was in September. So then they started playing the game of when will supplies be there? Well, they dragged their feet on all of that. So all of this, you say, when did we finally know? We thought we knew in September. We thought we were going to have the court decision in August, you know. It all culminated in November of 1976. Dr. Merritt, the Howard University doctor, got the supplies and he started treating Bob. That was around November 12th, 1976. And then on November 24th, the court decision was finally signed by Judge Washington and released. And that was the day before Thanksgiving, 1976. So in November 1976, when Robert had the marijuana cigarettes in his hand and the court decision in this hand, that's when we knew we'd won. So it was never clean cut. And honestly, I think it doesn't seem that long. I mean, it's 3 or 4 months, but it was just agonizing because we knew every day that Bob didn't have supplies. He was losing sight. And any of you who are alive in the 70s, you knew how hit and miss it was to get marijuana. So
may I know Michael has a follow-up, but may I ask that there's 4 months was that the 4 months between you thought you had it and then the you thought you had it at 4 months and then 4 months later you actually had it? Because I've heard of a very, you know, a lot of success has come from people withstanding 90 or after 97% of their efforts. A lot of entrepreneurs will give up at a 90 to 97% of prior to success, and the ones that endure the hardship of that last effort makes them successful. And I know I'm speaking out of turn, and I apologize to the rest of the council and you, Alice.
okay. I got nothing. I don't know what to say to that.
I'm sorry. My question to you was what were you, the 4 months, the 3 or 4 months that you were speaking of, was that was post thinking you already had it before you actually had it, correct?
Yes.
Okay, cool. That was my question. Thank you. That was the extra 3% that you
there were
need to.
There were these moments where we thought we'd won, and then somebody would call up and go, "Oh no, wait, we got to do this," and wait, he doesn't have the 750-pound safe, and then the doctor said, "Well, he can't come here and smoke every day. He's got to take it home," and so then the DEA calls us up and says, "Well, you'll have to get a 750-pound safe," and Bob said, "Excuse me, I don't mean to offend anyone." "Well, fuck you. I'm not going to buy a 750-pound safe." I mean, my landlady will object. I mean, it just got so crazy at times. And, you get over one hurdle that they put up and they come up with some other stupid thing. I mean, it was just.
Thank you so much. That is absolutely what I was hoping to hear. Thank you. That was my question. Sorry, I started smoking a joint because you've allowed me to smoke a joint in public. Like your efforts. I am sitting behind a bar right now that brings money home to my family. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
All right, we have a couple of follow-ups to this specific question before we move on to our next one. First one is from Michael Krowitz.
Thank you. And thank you so much, Alice, for being part of this roundtable. This is really great. And one of the things that Veterans Action Council is trying to do, and this, is pick up kind of where you left off as far as activism goes. And we created a really great document that our friend Ricardo dubbed the Green Paper that we've actually submitted as formal, part of our formal submissions to both the United Nations and the United States Senate. With their deliberations on federal policy that would deschedule cannabis. One of the things that struck us as we're trying to work on strategy and figuring stuff out is on more than one occasion, we've actually won, but then the win was sort of taken away from us. And we get a ruling from like Judge Francis Young. That was what we were thinking about before, with Judge Francis Young on our minds, with ruling that cannabis should be rescheduled. As far as we understand from the documentation, that was sort of a deal that was struck. That was something that Bob and you expected to happen. And then instead the DEA appeals it and appealed it on, and was able to overrule their own administrative law judge and keep cannabis in Schedule I, even after the judge ruled so sternly that it should be rescheduled. And it just strikes us, that that's sort of an Achilles heel of the movement. Like when you win, you go on. What happens when you win and you didn't actually win? Then you can't go on. So I don't know. It's sort of a strange question, but I think maybe you know where I'm coming from.
Well, I do exactly. Yes. And particularly when you get to the federal level, Michael, I think that's the case. In the Judge Young situation with rescheduling, we appealed that twice. It went to the Court of Appeals twice, and was knocked back because fundamentally the DEA administrator, thank you, Harry Anslinger, the DEA administrator has the power to say, well, no, yeah, thanks for all the time and effort, Judge, but no, I disagree. And so one of the things I think we fail at as far as reformers and activists go is we don't fully understand the regulations that are there and that can be used as weapons against us. I mean, they're voluminous and, stuck back in volume 93 on page 473, line 85, is something that's going to screw you. And that's, from my perspective, it's just gotten me to the point of, abolish DEA. And, what the hell are they doing there anyway? To my mind, they're another arm of CIA and NSA and all of that. You know, they're just little minions for CIA and NSA, and they're all attached to this. And
They're an avenue.
the what?
An avenue.
An avenue.
Ah, okay, that's a new one on me, I think. Anyway, it's you know, people always ask me, well, how do we win this? I don't know, but I know it's incumbent on getting DEA out of the way, because really they have an awful lot of shits that we don't even know about, that they can pull out. They can pull that rabbit out of the hat and go, aha, sorry. You didn't win that one. Good try though. You know, I mean, I don't know. Did I answer your question, Michael? I'm not sure. It just.
Yes, we are going to get inside that hat somehow and work with the rabbit. What can I say?
You know, yeah, that's what it takes. Yeah.
Well, that's what we're working for and toward. And so that's why we look to you, the giants whose shoulders that we stand upon, because you set the precedent for us. You took the lumps, you took the heat, you took all of that so that we could now be allowed to do what we do. And we're closer, but we're not anywhere near where we need to be. So we're still chipping at it. And that's why we're also working internationally, so that we can also go around the DEA. And that's one of our more recent petitions that we'll be talking to you about, is because, you know, Michael was part of the group that changed international law in 2020 to have medical cannabis removed from Schedule 4 at the United Nations. And we're working, and we'll be actually hosting a couple of rooms here next month for the United Nations. The V.A.C. is. So we're continuing to do our work. So thank you for being here. And we're going to kind of shift a little bit after I got one more question, one more follow-up from Amy King, and then we're going to go to Council Member Jones.
And I'm sorry, before we switch to the next question, I'm so excited to be here with Alice. I don't even think, in all of my travels and all my things, I don't think that I've ever been in the same room with Alice all these years. So this is super exciting for me. And I was thinking about your plegia, the palm. I wanted to reflect back on palm, and I meant to say it earlier. That early work that you guys laid out about use in plegia. I recently read an article about cannabinoids to treat spinal cord injury, and it kind of came forward again when you were talking about the judge who fell down the stairs, and thank God he recovered. But what this science is finding now, and you know, from kind of my short deep dive research, in early about 2012, I would say that they really truly began looking at the interaction of the endocannabinoid system at spinal injury or lesion, the disruption of a functioning endocannabinoid system, and how they can counteract that. And they have discovered now that early intervention at the time of an injury is the best way to treat someone who has a spinal cord injury. So thank you again for that. I wasn't sure if you're aware of what's happening in that specific type of case, and those things that you did with those Mars and Palm and Moms. I mean, literally, you see those as the top research, the top understood endocannabinoid system, cannabinoid, phytocannabinoid interaction. Right. And so thank you again for leading that, because that helps the most people, as opposed to these orphan, rare conditions, which are also important. I'm not discounting them.
Pseudo hypothyroidism. I mean, how many people have that?
Right. So
paraplegia, quadriplegia. Yeah.
Yeah, it affects, it turns out, 500,000 people a year in the United States. 500,000 people.
Wow.
I had no idea.
Wow. But your question and comments give me a good segue into a couple more things that I want to share with you. In California, in the 1990s, there was a young man named Scott Hager, who was, Scott was paraplegic. And Scott did a lot of good work in California. And he was really helpful in, let's see, let me share this again. All right. We had a lot of success. I wanted to bring these to your attention because we had a lot of success both in the 80s and the 90s with state resolutions passed by the legislature and sent to their congressional representatives in Washington. This is one from New Mexico, but the one that Amy's comments really triggered my mind for it was this one from California, which Scott Hager had a lot of input in. These are on PDF. I've sent it to Etienne, and you can all get this, but I think veterans ought to consider this approach to getting state resolutions of support that will then be transmitted to Washington. They're very easy to do, actually. And you need to write one that is specific to your requests, of course, but these two templates might give you something to look at in terms of maybe pursuing that. In some states it's called a memorial, in other states it's called a resolution. But I think it's something that the committee should be looking at as a means of activism.
We have one in draft form right now, so it's actually serendipitous that you're telling us
Great
that.
minds on the same track. I love it.
I know, choo choo.
Okay. Stop share. All right. Okay. Oops. Did I mute this?
Thank
Undo
you.
my mic there, pardon me. Thank you for that follow-up, Amy. And we're going to go next to a little bit of shift. Michael Green, you have a follow-up?
Not a problem. I just want to, number one, thank you, Alice, for being here. It's good to see you again.
Yes.
I
Michael.
wanted to share that you wrote a memoir called Medical Marijuana in America, Memoir of a Pioneer. Michael Kravitz and I have discussed this between us a number of times. I think it's a highly undervalued book, but for anybody listening or interested in what you just discussed in terms of when we won and the process you went through with the court cases, the other organizations, I think you've done a brilliant job.
Thank you.
Clearly and simply writing that history. So anybody that's interested in that history, who really wants to find it, go to your favorite bookstore, go to Amazon, wherever. The Memoir of a Pioneer, History of Medical Marijuana in America. It's excellent. So thank you.
Thank you, Michael. And let me explain quickly how that came about. Bob and I wrote Marijuana RX in 1998. And it did moderately well, but it was a little bit ahead of its time. And then the publisher went out of print in 2000, and went out of business. So it went out of print in 2007. And then in 2012, 13, when I came back into the issue, this book wasn't available anymore. And, besides, times change, right? This book clocks in at like close to 500 pages. And I thought, oh my God, this is 2014. People don't read 500 pages anymore. They just don't. And so that's what sent me to I essentially scaled this book down to this book. It's called Repurposing, folks, okay? And I kept most of Bob's writing, but I also added, an addendum so that people knew what happened to Bob. And so instead of 500 pages, we're at 269. Yeah, okay. So that was great. But then, like I said, realizing that all of this was in the analog age, I thought, well, it's time to repurpose marijuana RX again. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm taking it into parts, and then I'm adding these monographs with all the clippings and links to court decisions and videos, etc. So that's kind of the, if you want a quick read, this is it. You know, I'm proud of all of them. I mean, I think we wrote a very good book in 1998, and I like reworking it and getting it out to these new audiences. So
You've done an excellent job with it. Again, thank you so much. Good to see you, Alice.
Michael,
Thanks for being here.
love the hair, by the way.
Thank you. It's my COVID cut.
All right, we're gonna shift over to Council Member Anthony Jones.
Hi there, Alice. Anthony Jones here. I'm so happy to hear that you have this wonderful background as a nurse. I'm a mental health professional. So as you consider this next question, would you also consider the context of explanation with regards to medical necessity? The question is this: psilocybin is being studied for having profound effects in treating addiction, depression, and anxiety. Given your success in cannabis activism, what steps can a psilocybin advocate take to have similar results in drug policy reform?
Well, that's a tough one, Anthony.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, it's just I feel very strongly about this because I was a child of the 60s. I've done my share of hallucinogenics, acid, psilocybin, mescaline. I've done those. I like mushrooms much better than acid. Mescaline is my particular favorite, but psilocybin's number 2. And the reason I like both of those is because I feel they, and I haven't done, this was all college stuff, so I haven't done this stuff in years, but I feel that hallucinogenics sweep out the cobwebs in your brain. They somehow get rid of extraneous stuff and things reconnect. And that's the best non-clinical explanation I've come up with. And the idea of using this in mental health makes perfect sense to me, particularly in measured doses and with a psychiatrist or GP or therapist in the room. Oh, absolutely. We should have these. Doctors should have availability. I think probably to all 3: LSD, psilocybin, and mescaline. But psilocybin seems to be the main player these days, which is curious to me. I don't quite know how that came about. I guess my good friend over at MAPS, Rick Doblin, has been doing his job.
He's been doing a good job, but the mushroom's been doing its own job for us.
Well, that's probably true too. To mount a medical necessity case for psilocybin based on mental health, I think is going to be very difficult. And I'm just, being honest with you but by the same token, how many states have recognized psilocybin now? 4, 3? Oregon's one.
A handful, but it's growing, and there's legislation going through. There's currently here in the state of California, we're on what's called a 2-year bill. And so we're expecting one to come out specifically around access to, and there's lobbying in Sacramento. So it's growing like cannabis is, but at the same time, I think the work that you did in cannabis helped kind of crack the glass ceiling that other substances will be able and have been able to benefit from. But I am with you here and wondering the medical necessity, which I think is why we asked the question to you, because you've been through the legal dance numerous times.
Yeah, but and of course there are a lot of cancer patients who are using psilocybin as part of their therapy to reduce depression. And there's been several studies of, but I think it's primarily LSD, using LSD at end of life treatment. And I don't know if there's any more with psilocybin. There should be, because it's such a milder drug. It would be much more, I would think, better for the terminally ill patient. So I think you can certainly, I don't know. I really don't know, but it interests me, Anthony. It really does. It interests me a lot because I know I benefit from it. It gave me, taking mushrooms in college, you know, like I said, it swept out the cobwebs of maybe childhood or I think more the cobwebs of adolescent angst. You know, I think it helped to get rid of all that for me and gave me confidence to go forward. So I fully support the efforts, but I honestly, I just don't know what to say. Sorry.
Councilmember Ryan Miller, did you want to follow up? I see that you posted an article on the Hopkins Medicine regarding psilocybin and depression.
Yeah, it just came out 3 days ago. So this is, you know, I think a lot of us know that research does help kind of move legislation forward. So yeah, Hopkins is definitely doing a great job with leading that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of a sleeper, isn't it? I mean, I think it's just going to, it already has kind of exploded onto the scene, if you will. Well, but it's a small scene. I mean, let's face it, the reformers are a small scene. Okay, so it's kind of exploded among us, but I think the same thing's going to happen with mainstream. Or maybe cannabis has paved the way enough that people, I do think that's part of it too. People are more
allowed the way for it.
Yes, exactly right. Yeah, it allowed the way, and people are more open-minded. They think, well, I didn't think the CBD would help, and it did. So maybe there's something to this. You know, there's that kind of realm of thinking. But I do want to share before we get off of it. Share my screen again. I came across these things today, and I knew this question was coming up. This is, I had a nice exchange of documents or correspondence in the 1980s with Richard Evans Schultes, who wrote the book Plants of the Gods, which is still one of my favorite books. I still have it with me. Over the years, I've been getting rid of books because they're too heavy to move around. But this was one of my favorites. It came out in 1979, and so when we started ACT, I did write to Dr. Schultes, and I love this thing about thank you for your long letter. I don't know what that meant. I guess that's why he called me a doctor. But I did send them a copy of Mikuria's medical papers. But I found this paragraph to be very interesting from this brilliant man who wrote Plants of the Gods with Albert Hoffman, by the way. I mean, he's just amazing. But this thing here, where is it? We must understand how ingrained the Anslinger syndrome is and be patient in wearing it down. It appears to me that much progress with NIDA has already been made and that this will continue. I don't know.
Well, not so much, but
yeah, well, you know,
heart was in the right place.
What day is it? That's where NIDA is. You know, they kind of they're kind of all over the map. But anyway, that's that. Anthony, feel free to contact me, and I'm happy to talk about this a bit more because I believe in it. I'm 74 years old. I'd like to know that when my time comes, I have as much available to me as possible. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right, we will go.
Really quick. Wait.
Go ahead, Amy.
in the chat, I put a link. It's from an organization called Victoria Hospice, but it's basically an engagement survey about end of life psilocybin therapy for end of life emotional distress. And they are asking for input and contribution. So I dropped that link in the chat. Maybe Etienne can get it to you in your messenger or whatever. Because I think if you're interested in that topic, I'm interested in the hospice aspect as well. So I thought you would like to maybe just contribute as a previous hospice nurse to that conversation.
Sure, absolutely, thank you. Who is it once meet me on the mountain in Maui? I saw that go by. Who was that?
Michael Crowitz.
Michael, all right.
I'm the one who said yes, yes, yes to anything Hawaii. Anybody go in on Hawaii, I'm all in for that.
To the
All
top of Haleakala we go.
Yeah, I could do Hawaii. That's cool.
All righty. So our next question is from Council Member Crowitz, Michael Crowitz. No, I was wrong there. Pardon me. It was Tony is next. I humaned. Sorry, Tony. My apologies. 5, sir.
First of all, I want to thank you, Alice, for being a trailblazer and being a pioneer in the medical cannabis movement. And my question, I want to start out by reading a meme by Dr. Benjamin Benulis. He's Dr. Chiropractic from Arizona. He says most therapeutic pharmaceutical drugs work not by treating the root cause, but by blocking the biochemical pathways that create one of the disease's symptoms. Given that, and given cannabis being the movement started as a medical cannabis, in our endocannabinoid system, how it supplements our endocannabinoid system when we have deficiencies to treat disease. Do you feel that cannabis should be classified as an herbal supplement or a drug?
Yes. I feel it should be both. I advocate this big tent in which the cannabinoid drugs are already coming down the pipeline from the pharmaceuticals, from the GW pharmaceuticals and the others. Those drugs are being created and they're going to be efficient, and you can rail against the pharmaceutical whatever, but it's happening and it's going to happen. But what our goal now as activists is to keep this tent as big as possible, and to try and have it available as both an herb and a cannabinoid that you get at your pharmacy, because some people they just, in fact, the vast majority of people, I don't think, can do cannabinoid medicine the way it is now. It's too complicated for them. And I've gotten a real insight into that, trying to control this polymyalgia rheumatica that I have. It's complicated. You have to get up to a certain dosing level. There's so many kinds of, do I want to vape? Do I want tincture? Do I want gummies? I'm coming down pretty hard on the side of gummies. They're really easy, and they do the job. And so those should be available in my herbal supplement store. Why shouldn't they be? So we have to find a way as a reform movement to allow all of the good and to stand up, and fight against. I'm seeing too many states where, why shouldn't you be able to grow your own? I mean, what is wrong with that? And we have to find a way as activists to meld all these things together and create a big tent for cannabis. because it's a huge thing. I found myself a few years ago talking about cannabis is like the universe, or learning about cannabis is like the universe. It's constantly expanding. As soon as you learn one thing, it goes out 2 light years more. And that's, oh my God, that's so exciting. You know, it really is. It's just so exciting. But that doesn't mean that, you know, if Henry wants to grow 6 plants in his backyard, he should be able to. Come on, you know. Keep it simple, stupid is kind of what I'm thinking of here. But we just need to find a way to make it an herb and a drug. We need to find, that's important, I think.
Testify, my sister, testify.
You know, I spent 2 years with Mary's Medicinals, traveling literally around the globe. It was such a sweet gig, I gotta tell you. And I went to so many conferences and heard so many exciting studies and reports that came out. And I'm just thrilled to be a part of this. And to know that I contributed to that. And now it you know, it's up to you folks. You're front and center now. So,
Well, thank you. We put ourselves there because
I'm sorry.
we have a lot more work that has to be done, and you know, we're if not us, who? That's one of the things that we have found, and
That's it.
if not us, whom? You know, somebody has to be the steward. Somebody has to be the one to carry the torch, and so Michael, our next question asker, has been working internationally and is guiding us to be international stewards so that we can end around the DEA and take these treaty bites out of their arguments so that we can actually change the entire paradigm, which is its own dance. And we're on the dance floor, but at the same time, it's going to be a long slog, and we're prepared for it. As soldiers, they taught us how to fight, but they never taught us how to stop. So Michael Krawitz, my brother, council member.
Thank you. Thanks. So, you know, back to this question in a way sort of jumps back and relates to what we were talking about before about, you know, when you won and in a way, you know, they gave the trophy to the people who had lost instead of, you know, that's the way I've given an analogy in the side meetings that we've had. It would be like you were at a big event and you clearly won, and then they just, with all the crowds clapping and everybody, they just walked right past you and went right to the person that didn't win and handed them the trophy, and then everything seemed normal to everybody but you, and then you let, I mean, that's kind of the surreal world that we're in. But anyway, flipping that on its head and just taking a thought exercise for a minute, what would have happened, do you think, if they had actually, you know, I've actually presented it many times as a mistake that the DEA didn't give us Schedule 2 from their perspective. Like if they had given us Schedule 2 back then, it might have actually slowed us down. It might have actually prevented Prop 215. It might have actually, you know, did a lot of damage to where we are really right now in the timeline. So as a thought exercise, you know, if you don't mind, you know, what do you see? What would the world have looked like now if they had actually done what they were supposed to? They actually given Schedule 2 as they promised, Bob.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's an interesting question, and there's two ways that could have happened. One is through HR 4498, which set up this National Office of Marijuana Study and would have provided federal marijuana to states, and it would have been rescheduled to 2. HR 4498 was introduced in 1981. So 5 or 6 years before Young's decision. And I don't think Young's decision ever stipulates a schedule, as I recall, but it certainly said it should be rescheduled. I guess that would have been the next battle. You know, hindsight is 2020, and there's a lot of discussion now about Schedule 2, and, you know, would it be, if, let's say DEA tomorrow said, okay, marijuana Schedule 2 now, would that be good or bad? There's people that make a very good argument that it's bad. It's going to be just the only thing that really separates the two, set Schedule 1 and 2, is no accepted medical use in the U.S. Right, and it would still be. And my point is, it would still be just as hard to get marijuana to do research on. And it might be just as hard if the Young decision had gone into Schedule 2. It could be just as hard as it is now, or was then. But the other part of your question kind of interests me more, because I think there have been several points along the way here where DEA has been hoisted on its own petard. In the late 70s, New Mexico passed the law, February 1978, went to all the federal agencies and said, this is what we want to do for our citizens, and we'll send you the research data, and all you have to do is send us the marijuana. And the federal government just set up this obfuscation program that was just unbelievable, to the point of New Mexico officials calling officials within FDA, and the officials within FDA would say, well, now you're getting warmer, but I can't really tell you if that's the way to go. I mean, it was just childlike, just crazy. So if let's say DEA had said, right, hey, we want to support this research program in New Mexico. Oh, hey, all you other states, this is great. We'll get all the research we need, and we'll prove once and for all whether this works. That was one route they could have taken, but they didn't take it. They didn't take that, did they? So that was strike one. Strike two is obviously the Young decision. They had a chance, DEA had a chance there to say, wow, well, they probably couldn't blame it on Harry Anslinger because he's a saint, and that really would have confused everybody. But my point is, they had a chance. Something could have happened at that point, and it didn't. And then the third, and probably the most, I don't know what of all, was Prop 215, or was the closing of the Compassionate Access Program. They shut this only program down where you could get legal access to marijuana. And they just thought, okay, well, we'll have to take a little bit of heat, but it won't be too bad. It was awful for them. It was really awful for them. Good, I say, it was awful. They shut this program down. They essentially said to the AIDS patients, drop dead, we don't care. And to the people who were in the program already, some of them were getting supplies. They continued to get their supplies. But there were a good number of people who were approved, but never ever got supplies. How cruel is that? I mean, it was an astonishing time. And I honestly think the feds thought, well, we'll just have to take a little heat for a little while, and then it will be fine. Well, surprise, Prop P was out there waiting for them, and then Prop 215. They were just literally hoisted on their own petard. And they haven't been able to get control since, let's face it. I can't say what the world, the question was what the world would look like if it had gone to Schedule 2. I have no idea. But I think in the perfect world, if HR 4498 had gone through in 1981 or 82, it couldn't have hurt. And I think we'd be so far ahead in terms of research. Think how far advanced we'd be in research if Harry Anslinger hadn't existed, if the Marijuana Tax Act of 37 never happened. I mean, think where we might be, because there was some good research going on. I mean, you got Roger Adams in the 1940s discovering CBD, and you've got the Czechoslovakians and whatnot doing some really good research in the 1950s. And then into the 60s, we had kind of a change coming around about attitudes towards drug abuse and whatnot. Think where we might be if Harry Anslinger and that stupid Marijuana Tax Act hadn't come along. I don't know. It's stuff I think about from time to time.
And I understand why you would, because of the depths that you have had to delve on the issue and how you've had to firsthand come across his cruelty and inhumanity more than anything while you were fighting for basic humanities. It's we're sorry you had to bear that cross, because it had to be quite unbearable at times.
Yeah, at times it was. When Amy mentioned Peter McWilliams, and I had occasion to look back at that case and recognize the cruelty there, and that just kind of set up this chain of thoughts going back through Barbara and Kenny Jenks, and how the state of Florida was remarkably cruel to them, taking it all the way to the Florida Supreme Court, to prosecute these kids. I mean, come on. And then in the 80s, you had so many people that needed it, and they thought the state laws were going to give it to them, and it didn't. It was just a cruel time. And lots of it was due to Harry Anslinger. I'm sorry, but that's the way it is. This is a good segue, by the way. Could I go into my last few slides?
Absolutely, go there, because I have a follow-up on where we are and what you have helped us with. So
well,
go
let
ahead.
me just share this one case with you, because where am I? There I am. James Burton. James Burton was a very interesting young man from Kentucky. He was arrested. He served in the Army in Vietnam and smoked marijuana regularly. His family apparently was riddled with glaucoma, although he wasn't diagnosed with it until 1972. That whole area of his case is very hazy, but nevertheless, doesn't matter. He feels that his brothers were more blind than he, and it was because he smoked marijuana, and I totally believe him. He got arrested in 1987, and he had numerous acres in Kentucky where he was growing a few plants. He lost everything. He went to jail for a number of years. But after jail, he moved to Holland and became very active in cannabis cultivation. Let's go back to here. This link right here will take you to an article about James. Very good article, give you all the details on his case, and all the facts and figures. But James did go to prison. I love this picture. Here he is at the Marion Fed prison camp. This is James here. And this is the baseball team. This is the Outlaws at the Outlaws baseball team at the Marion Fed prison camp. But this is a more recent picture of James. And he moved to Holland, started growing marijuana, became involved with government agencies there. He had a contract with the government in Holland to grow marijuana. It's very complicated, as you can imagine, but I felt it was really important for the V.A.C. to know about James if they didn't already, and maybe you do, I don't know. And maybe, I don't know if any outreach would be useful. He's still in Holland. He was part of the developer of that seed bank that, what's his name? Clark.
Rob Connell Clark. I'm actually business partners with Rob, and actually, Michael was going to host Jim this weekend for his Veterans Voices, but unfortunately, he isn't able to make it. So yes, we are in contact, and boy, are we all like-minded.
With James Burton or Robert Clark?
Burton. Rob, I'll talk to on Tuesday, because I talk to him every other Tuesday.
Oh, okay, great. Well, never mind. The Alliance tried to help James, and it was interesting because it was a federal case, and they could have sent him to jail for like 50 years, and they didn't. The jury didn't. Um, and so it was an important case, and it gets forgotten a lot. But again, it shows the cruelty. They took everything from this man. And so after he got out of prison, he and his wife just went to Holland, and here he is in Holland. So, okay, I'm glad you know about Jim. That's great. So.
No, and thank you for letting everybody, we do, but that we're less than a handful that do. So thank you for making people aware of him and his history, because again, that's also part of the history of our movements, of those who have had to become expatriates. Tony Landry here was an expatriate who had to leave his state to go to Arizona for his medical access. I left the state of Louisiana too, because I knew I could not do what I do there, nor in West Virginia, where I went to college. I would be thrown under the jail in either of those states doing what I did back then, as opposed to having the 22+ year legacy I have here in Berkeley, California. So, you know, it's also knowing when and where to pick your battles. And you didn't have a choice in the sense that you had to stand your ground regardless, especially because you were exposed because of your husband, of what he did and the access that he had. I mean, it put marks on your backs and on your foreheads at the same time, which, needless to say, comes with its own weight that makes anything you wear a little heavier, as they say. But you have also helped thread many patients through that compassionate IND program, because once Bob had access, you went on educating people on who and what and why, and that was very key to the hard work that you did, resulted in blood, sweat, and tears, literally. You witnessed the shutdown of the compassionate IND program due to outright lies and misinformation. And then recently, the compassionate IND program was reopened due to Epidiolex. How did you feel when you saw that happen and transpire?
Well, I felt fine, because I feel Epidiolex is a really important drug, and it's helping a lot of kids. So, and it's funny, I don't think I'd ever really considered that was the reopening of the compassionate IND program. The compassionate, the FDA has always had a policy of finding a way to get promising drugs, not yet approved for marketing, to patients who might need it. So I think Epidiolex, because it made some progress through FDA as part of it was an orphan drug, as I recall. And so it would, meaning it didn't have a gargantuan population. It had a small population that it could be useful for. And FDA has always had a policy to allow access to those kinds of drugs. So marijuana was not unique in that regard. And there's some newspaper article that I came across recently in which that was one of the nice parts of going back through newspaper.com and finding all these articles from 1976, 77, and 78. Somebody mentioned a clipping service getting a clipping a month later. It wasn't quite that bad with Bob and I, because Keith Stropp from Normal Normal had a clipping service, and Keith would send us all the articles on medical marijuana. But my gosh, there were a lot more going on than we had any idea of. And you find little quotes in them about how, and it's very revealing about how the federal government was feeling and how officials within the government were feeling. And there's one quote where I think it's Ed Tokus of FDA says about Bob's case that I guess the reporter asked, well, how about doing this to release this marijuana to this young man? And he said, well, we were just all sitting around and we decided, well, we had to call it something, so why not call it compassionate access? And it was like, it's just, and then when you think what they did with that, I mean, but my point is, FDA has always had that route, that compassionate route. And so I'm glad that people were able to get access to Epidiolex during clinical trials. And I know that many clinical trials stopped the double-blind thing early on because they could see that the kids were doing better. It wasn't rocket science. They could see that was happening. So I think as reformers going forward, we have to be able to, first of all, as we've already discussed tonight, we have to know the history and what's happened, but we also have to realize that FDA especially, I mean, it's entrenched. You might make some road headways with, getting NIDA in or out of the picture, depending what you want. But DEA and FDA, boy, they're entrenched. And, I hear reformers say, if we just do this to FDA or that, well, no, there are procedures. And if you at least don't understand those procedures, you're sunk. So I worry when I hear you veterans talking about going back to the compassionate IND program. I want to see you go forward. I want to see you take what was the compassionate IND program and make it worthy of the 21st century. Because, really a lot of the cruelty that we've already discussed here with Peter McWilliams, Todd McCormick, so many people who never got the legal access they deserved. We want to avoid that. We don't want to go back there. We want a new, improved cannabis compassionate access program. And I personally, we have to have some standardization in this country, medically speaking. Adult use, recreational use, whatever you want to call it, they can sort it out. But in terms of medical use, we have to have some standardization because it's still too much, medical care by zip code. It's still too much that way. I see a hand raised. That's so cool.
Anthony, you have a follow-up, council member?
Yes, and Alice, to hear you say that that last part there, and to say it at this time, and I think that's why I had asked you to struggle along with me with regards to the medical necessity, because that is that process, that is an example of a process for the 21st century. It's a very straightforward process that involves physicians actually working with patients to justify the use of a particular treatment. And that's being very simplistic.
Okay.
But it is, it is for lack of any other term, the thing that gets that would help make cannabis and any derivatives available for people who are on Medicaid, for example. That's the primary criteria for any type of treatment. At least, as far as I understand and I know. And that's just Medicaid. And what was really amazing to me with respect to my understanding of it all is the federal government does not have a definition nor a criteria for medical necessity. they actually leave that definition up to the insurance companies. So at some point in the future, any type of access, in order for people to really benefit from it, there has to be some means for them to be able to afford it. And that's really the only way that I see there. So do you see taking aspects of what you and your husband did, and what this group is talking about with regards to that compassionate access program, and actually taking lessons learned from that and apply it to the structure of what's required for medical necessity, and kind of look at the whole big picture with regards to medical marijuana? Because just for me, as I'm watching it all progress, it appears to me that everyone, even the pharmaceutical companies, are pushing more of recreational instead, and it's almost as though they're leaving behind the true intent, in particular, of the people who are really fighting the battle, like yourself, for people who need this as a treatment. And so, I'm a little concerned about that. And so, being new to this and wanting to find means to help people in my community, do you see maybe a correlation between the two, this compassionate access program and actually combining elements of what's necessary to make the case for medical necessity? Or do you see that perhaps there might be some other hybrid avenue that we might consider looking at?
Well, I think it's going to be a hybrid. And I don't know enough details about psilocybin at this point in time. Is there a company that's manufacturing it?
And I mind, and I'm sorry, I appreciate you. I'm basically more talking about medical cannabis.
Okay.
In general.
Right. Well,
I did it again. I'm sorry.
well, it's complicated. It's so complicated. I think I hear coming from a lot of veterans this thing about reopening the compassionate program. It's still there. You don't have to reopen it. You have to get whatever avenue it is that you're interested in back into it, if it needs to be. Now with psilocybin, if there's a company creating it, manufacturing it, they could probably go the orphan drug route that GW went with Epidiolex. I don't know if that's an option for them. With regard to the other point that you brought up, which is that people seem more interested in recreational than medical, I think that is totally spot on. And it worries the dickens out of me. I don't like some of the trends I'm seeing in states that have both medical and recreational, because the money's in the recreational side, and the recreational side is all, high 27% THC, is all high THC content. And I'm sorry to any budster that might be listening, it's not that easy to just take the 27% THC and adapt it down to a medical use. I mean, medical patients need medical drugs. And so I'm worried about it too, Anthony. And the big tent that I talked about earlier, I mean, there's people trying to take down big arms of it and get those out of the way. It could be that we're going towards a time where medical cannabis use will kind of fall away, and you will have to make battles all over again, retaking ground that we already had. I don't know, but I do fear the recreational influence here. One of the conferences that I went to in the couple of years back, the CEO of, I'm pretty sure it was Canopy, Canopy Growth out of Canada, talked about he sees the cannabis issue as a pendulum, which I do too. And it's definitely heading towards recreational, but he feels, at least he did at the time, that it would swing back to medical, and that medical was just as important as recreational. Now I have to say, when he said that, it gave me a lot of hope. But it's so complex right now. Bob and I had one enemy, the federal government. You folks have multitudes of enemies, not enemies, I shouldn't say that, multitudes of obstacles. You know, you have state laws, you have state regulations, you have new and emerging federal regulations that some of us don't even know about. I'd love to know, what regulations did DEA really create for those new people that are getting cultivation licenses? I'd love to know what's buried in all those bits and tons and stacks of paper. So it's much more complicated for you folks now. Well, no, I shouldn't say that.
Oh, it's a little more or less, you know, it is
Yeah,
somewhat more complicated, but
Yeah, it's complicated different. So
no doubt it's
but-
complicated history on top of that. And we hear what you're saying about the Compassion IND, but we're talking about the cannabis wing of the Compassion IND is what we want to reopen. We want to get the farm back up and going, but growing medical grade cannabis at different rates and ratios, just as they're starting to with CBD. And if they don't, we want to have the availability to be able to import 3 months supplies of over-the-counter access medicines, which, as you know, are available in Canada and the Netherlands, Uruguay, Israel, etc. So that's where we're coming from on trying to access that again, because we've seen what Dr. El Soli has grown. I tested independently because I was part of the retesting programs in the United States, because I was one of the few ethical dispensaries that realized, you know, we have to test what's actually going on here. And so I brought actual scientists from the Netherlands to calibrate laboratories so that we could get an understanding first about THC. And then, of course, when we started to do platelet tests, the first thing I did was get access from a medical patient, I won't say who, and I got and tested it, and it immediately failed molds and mildews.
Wow.
Because of how it is. Now, I have nothing against the different ratios, and in fact, it's kind of heartening to hear that Dr. El Soli and them are starting to play around with CBD varietals currently. But at the same time, we feel that there is much more access to research that they are not messing with, that we could be helpful and be contributors to. So we hear what you're saying, but, you know, are we on the right track by doing something like that, or would you advise against that?
No, I think you're definitely on the right track. And with these new farms theoretically opening up, I know there's at least 2 other licenses. Yeah. I think you just need to be careful. If you say we want to reopen the compassionate access program, that confuses people. No, you don't. You don't want to reopen that. You don't want that, because what El Soli grew back in those days, from what a geneticist told me, is just, you know, 1 hair above being hemp. You know, I mean, Bob called it ditchweed.
True. It sets around 3 to 4%.
Right. Yeah. So I be careful that you don't entrap yourself by saying, we want to go back to we want this to reopen. No, you don't. This is the 21st century, man. You want compassion, but you want compassion with good cannabis And a recognition of the vastness of therapeutic value it has. That's what you want. So no, go for it. Just be careful of that language, that you don't trap yourself.
Thank you for correcting our nomenclature. We're completely adaptable to change.
We all know.
Right on.
Thank you for answering that.
I have
You
a
betcha.
follow-up question. I have a kind of a different question from Councilmember Armstrong. He wanted to ask about you.
So Alice, thank you for taking these little extra questions. So
Sure.
the autoimmune disease that you spoke of, actually, my mother died. She had that diagnosis, and I have 2 autoimmune diseases. So this is kind of the topic I wanted to go towards. So cannabis is so helpful. There, many doctors think that it's that it's able to regulate our autoimmune system, and it's so helpful for these diseases. And real quick, I just wanted to say, if you can get even more full spectrum, so where you're getting some type of full spectrum where you're getting also the other minor cannabinoids, you would probably see even better eating completely full spectrum cannabis. You will definitely see definite results, just from personal experience. But I guess my question is, so autoimmune diseases and the Arthritis Foundation really hits close to me because I worked with them before I became a cannabis advocate. How do you think we can bring these large organizations like the Arthritis Foundation into this? Because here's the thing, Alice, my mother died of heart failure that I am absolutely convinced was from taking steroids for the last 7 years of her life at high doses, because that was the only things the doctor could give her to fight her pain. Now, on the
Your sound cut out. Hold on. He just has to move his phone for a second. It's his microphone sometimes. Try it.
now,
There you go.
she started going to Florida, and her Florida doctor actually tried to convince her to add cannabis, but because she was a baby boomer born in 1940, she was very much against stuff like that. How do you think we can bring the big groups in to see that, because I know they're so tied into the Western medicine. Am I getting that question across right? They're so tied into the Western medicine that I feel that's part of the obstacle.
Yeah, I think you're right, George. The Arthritis Foundation has been remarkably open to the idea. At least that's my experience with them. And the same with the MS, particularly in the last decade or so. Both arthritis and MS societies have been pretty open. The problem that they have, any of those groups, any of the cancer groups and whatnot, harks back to something that came up earlier: the insurance companies. We got the tail wagging the dog here, because the insurance companies determine what's medically necessary, not your doctor. And the whole question of Medicaid and insurance and who's going to pay for this is it's an enormous question. I certainly don't have any answers to it. I don't know of anyone who's working with the insurance industry, and boy, that's an industry that needs working with, because they're in
Yes,
the
ma'am.
yeah, they are. So I don't know. There's an economist in Australia that I've had some correspondence with, who's done some excellent excellent studies, sort of along the lines of the father and daughter team down in Georgia there about what the cost, how much money we would save if, if we could only get cannabinoids worked into the system. It's that kind of study that's going to someday, when you least expect it, the insurance company will go, yeah, and they'll all get together in their little cabals and decide, well, we gotta, you have to give them the avenue to get back into the game. I think we're beyond pointing out how, well, I don't know, never mind that. But they have to have a reason to get out of the way, and it's money. It's always money. So
That's the answer that I've always come to too. So I appreciate that, Alice.
okay.
It's funny that you mentioned that, though. I did fiscal health costs for patients that left Texas. I'm talking kids who were in emergent seizure disorder, rescue meds, had to be hospitalized, end up in pediatric ICU for 10 days. Parents can't hold a job, so they're completely dependent on the system. Once they exited Texas, began a medical cannabis regimen, these kids didn't have emergency room visits anymore. Their parents returned to work because their kids were functional and well enough to go back to school. And I took that to the legislature, both the House and the Senate in 2017. I mean, I could literally prove with their Medicaid records from Texas the previous years. I could show what they were doing in Colorado, and they just weren't even moved.
Right.
Not the insurance system, not the legislatures, nobody. It was just bizarre. You've turned people out, taking people off the system for minuscule amounts of reimbursement, let's call it reimbursement. You have parents who are now functional tax-paying citizens. The benefits to the community, society, the governmental system, the healthcare system was immense. I mean, all the way around. And they don't care. It's bizarre. Sorry to interject.
No, but maybe, and this just came into my head, maybe we just haven't shown them the right way. They're not very courageous. And so none of them are going to take the first step. So that's part of it. But the other thing is, I think the reformist of the 21st century has to be a little bit less adversarial and more cooperative. You have to go to people that inside of you probably really detest, and you have to make them understand that this is in their best interest. And I don't know how you do that. And part of it is as the Schultes letter, and that's one reason I included it in my little slides there, the letter from Dr. Schultes. We have to be patient. Things are changing. It does take time. It takes time to work the poison of Anslinger out of the system entirely. And then it's on to the next poison, because there's always another one. There's just always another one. But I do think the comment about reformers need to work more with the big guys and be less adversarial. Back in the 90s, it was great when all those people from ACT UP chained themselves to the doors of the Health and Education and Welfare Building, and marched down streets in San Francisco because they wanted their cannabis. That was great. That was the 90s. But it's real different now. And so it takes different tactics. I'd like to see your report, Amy. If you'd send it to me, that'd be great.
I can put you two together, no problem at all.
Well, the thing is, I had a robbery in my house in 2019. They stole.
Aha!
They
Undoubtedly. It was those big insurance companies that came and got it. Okay.
They got my seed collection. I'd been in, Europe. I'd been to South Africa. They even took my collection of Rastafari and plush dolls. They took everything. So I will see. Here's the thing. I have to recreate. Thousands of folders that I had, but technically in that one, what I need to do is just dig through emails, because obviously I emailed it to people. So I just haven't recreated the files. I'm sure somewhere along the way, it's in an email. Just got to find it. So I'll get it to you though, for sure, because it was astounding to me that we could recreate the amount of monies that were saved or would have been realized if they would just change the law. These people were begging to come home. These were Texans and they wanted to come back home. These were generational Texans, and it was just so sad. I sold my house in Texas after that session. I was just so disgusted. I said, I can't be part of this.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Well,
anyways.
I will put you all together. Needless to say, Alice.
Miss Etienne,
Go ahead.
could you also help me to make contact with Miss Randall as well? I sent my information to you, Miss Randall, in the chat, but if you could help assist me there, Etienne, I'd like to talk to her more about this.
Absolutely. I will.
Alice O'Leary Randall @gmail.com. No middle punctuation. Alice O'Leary Randall gmail.com. So
There you go.
I'll save you a step, Etienne.
Well, I appreciate that, but now the world now knows your email address, so you're going to get a lot of email. Alice, needless to say, it has been a pleasure and an honor to have you tonight. And I know we've brushed through 2 hours, and we probably have more. So we would be honored to have you back in the future, as we cannot thank you enough for the work that you did in helping us with our green paper, and your willingness to help and assist us. And if there's anything that we can do for you, please let us know. Do remember, everybody, that her website is www.aliceolearyrandall.com to learn and get more information. And I cannot thank enough all of our council members tonight who joined us. Tony Landry, Michael Crowitz, George Armstrong, Anthony Jones, Amy King, Michael Green, Mary Lynn Mathry, Ryan Miller, and Pearson Kennedy Crosby as well. I thank you all for joining us. And Alice, is there anything else that you would like to say before we part?
God bless you, everyone. Keep on keeping on, kids.
We
Hey, Mary Lynn.
appreciate. We will do our best.
Yay, Alice.
Hey, Mary Lynn, go ahead.
No, we're just doing a quick hello, hello back and forth. Good to see her. And since it's been a long time with COVID.
Yeah, I got travel fever bad.
Well,
and that ain't good.
Well, we hope you're able to scratch that itch soon, but it's a normal feeling to have right now.
Yes, it is. Yeah. So,
well, everybody, thank you everybody much for tonight. I'm gonna close it out now, and this was Veterans Action Council Roundtable number 31, the changing role of the reformer, with our special guest Alice O'Leary Randall. So thank you, everybody. Have a great night and the rest of your weekend.
thank you all. Good night.